All right, we'll say good morning, guten Chodesh, lichtige Chanukah. Schos Baruch Hashem to be able to continue everyone, to be continuing Baruch Shmuel on our journey in Sanhedrin. I'm sorry, I had no choice but to put out a poll for Daf Yomi. I think it's the first time I ever put out a poll in the Daf Yomi chat, but I know like on legal holidays, sometimes it's such a conflict of schedule, so I figured we'll just go, it was Sanhedrin, so it's Achari Rabim Lahatos. We follow the majority, so okay, the majority spoke, so sorry for those who were inconvenienced by the time. But, all right, looking forward to getting back to regular schedule. In any event, begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for the year of Tavshin Pei, our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tilsim Mishpacha, for dedicating all the Shrim and Drushos this year as a schus for Besaros Tavos for Am Yisrael. We thank the Tilsim Mishpacha, Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves, Haba Aleinu L'Tova, the Kelman family, in memory of Amit Zichron Devracha ben David Levi, the brother of Itai Levi, who was killed in Gaza on the first night of Chanukah. You may remember again that Itai Levi married Rachel Kelman, the daughter of Avram and Shendi Kelman, who used to live here in Baltimore, made Aliyah, Baruch Hashem, and this is Itai's brother, a very, very special neshama, who mamish gave his life on the Mizbeach of Kiddush Hashem for Am Yisrael, for Eretz Yisrael. You know, we read about the stories of the Maccabim and the Chashmonaim, and it's important to understand that we are zochah to live in a time where we have modern day Chashmonaim and Maccabim as well. They wear the uniforms of Tzahal. They wear the uniforms of the Israel Defense Forces. They are Chashmonaim. They are Maccabim. And each and every day they go out and they are Moser Nefesh for Am Yisrael and for Eretz Yisrael. And not just for our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael, but for everyone. And we should just make sure over the course of this Chanukah to continue to daven for their safety, to continue to daven for their Hatzlacha, and Emir Hashem for those who have given their lives, Kiddush Hashem Ha'am Ba'aretz, that Emir Hashem Chadash Baruch Hu should give their neshamas a tremendous aliyah and their families a nechama. Our week of learning sponsors, Bruce Levin in the merit and memory of Avital Kala Bas Tova Batya, Paul and Kathy Pollack in memory of Paul's aunt Esther Bas Zacharia, and our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Menashe and Bracha Efron in honor of their nephew Ezra Lev Tolchinsky, who is beginning a 3-month miluim in the north. May our learning be a zechus for him and for all of our precious and brave soldiers, and may HaKadosh Baruch Hu provide him with continued hatzlacha and protection and bring him home to his family b'shalom and b'karov. And our Daf Yomi sponsor, Chazan Mark Childs of Santa Barbara, California, with a thank you to the Shir and the tech team who allows him to connect to the Shir each and every day. Beautiful, incredible. All right, and of course, as always, we dedicate our learning in the schus of our precious hostages. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu bring them home b'shalom and b'karov, and in the schus of our holy soldiers, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu allow them to be successful b'chol ma'aseh yadayim, and as well to bring them home to their mishpachos b'shalom and b'karov. But with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Tesvav. We have a lot to do today, and it's never enough time. Never enough time. But in Eretz Hashem, we will do our best. So today's daf is Tesvav. 15. We are picking up in Eretz Hashem on Yud Daled Beis 14b at the 2 dots, right? Yeah, not a Ravai. No, I didn't get up to that. Is that wishful thinking? Tanya Kavasai, Rav Yosef? Tan Rabbanon. Is that in Sanhedrin? Are we in Sanhedrin? Okay. Where am I? Tan Rabbanon Meister Sheni? No, Tan Rabbanon. Oh, Ezu Meister Sheni. Got it. Yeah, not Ravai. Oh, good. Okay. All right. Not to Ravai. Meister Sheni she'ein damav yidun b'shlosha. So we'll say. So remember again. So the Mishnah is going through what you need for the adjudication of different cases. So the Mishnah spoke about not to Ravai, which is 4th year produce. Remember again, first 3 years. Ultimately again. So produce is considered to be arla, right? After 3 years, 4th year produce has a different status called nata revai or kerem revai if it's talking about a vineyard. What's the status of revai produce? Essentially, it's treated like meiser sheni, which means it's yours. Excuse me. You can utilize it, but you have to consume it in Yerushalayim Ira Kodesh. That's the halacha. So the Mishnah spoke about this idea of not the revai or meiser sheni, she'ein damav yeduin, that it has an unknown value. So the assessment of its value is done by a beis din of 3. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? So Tan Rabbanon, Ezu meiser sheni, she'ein damav yeduin. What does it mean, Meiser Sheni, that doesn't have a value that's known? Or Siglimar says, for example, Pero Shir Kivu V'yayin Sheikrim Umo Shech Lidus. So an example would be as follows. Let's say you have Meiser Sheni produce that rotted, or you have Meiser Sheni wine that went bad, or Meiser Sheni coins that rusted over. So the issue over here is that rotted produce, or turned wine, or for that matter, unusable rusty coins, don't necessarily have an immediately known value. But because these items have sanctity, there needs to be a process to assess their value. That's essentially what's unfolding over here. What the Mishnah is really teaching me is as follows, that halacha l'maisa, anytime you have something that has consecration and you need to valuate it, you can't just have an individual valuate it. Instead, again, that has to be done by a basin. So if you have Meiser Sheni and you don't know the value of the Meiser Sheni, so again, I have Meiser Sheni produce, it rotted. So now, boss, remember again, if it rots, I still owe the value of that to the Beis Hamikdash. So the shaila is, what is the value of rotted produce? So then I'm going to assemble a basin of 3 people in order to go ahead and establish that value. But it has to be, and this is now the Gemara says, the Brisa says, it has to be a panel, a basin of 3 lekuchos. The lekuchos are merchants, meaning people who know what they're talking about, which makes sense. Since all of this is about valuation, you want it to be merchants who understand how to evaluate produce. Avalo b'shlosha she'en lekuchos. But you can't just, I will say, this is not like hataras nedarim, where you just gather 3 people who are Jewish and breathing, right, and go ahead and sit them down to be a bezdin for hataras nedarim, right? But again, this bezdin really needs to evaluate something that has consecration. As such, you really need merchants. Interestingly enough, even if halacha l'maisa, even if one of them is a non-Jew, you don't even need 3 Jews. What you need is at least 2 Jews, and one of them could be a Gentile, as long as they're merchants and know what they talk about. Even if one of the people involved happens to be the owner of the produce as well. What's that first white line? What happens if you have 3 merchants for this beis din, but let's say they're all in business with each other? They're all in business with each other. So in other words, does that impact anything? So the Gemara says, Tashma, ish v'shtei nashav, podin meiser sheni, shein damav yidun. So also you have a brayz that says, a man and his 2 wives have the ability to comprise a beis din to evaluate meiser sheni. Well, maybe that's not a good raya. Dilma, kigon Rapapa, ubas Abasura. Maybe the example of that is Rapapa and his wife. So Rapapa's wife was the daughter of Abasura, and his wife was financially independent. So maybe that's not a good raya, because we're talking about a case of wives that are financially independent of their husbands. Okay, so we'll say, so that last question remains unanswered. So what we know is you need a basin of 3, and they need to be 3 merchants. Incredible. Next, Hekdeshos Bishlosha. So Hekdesh, similarly again, Hekdesh has to be evaluated by a basin of 3. So Masnisin Lo Ki Aitana. So our Mishnah is not like the following Tana. The Sanya, Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov Omer, Afilu Tzinora Shal Hekdesh, Tzricha Asara B'nei Adam Liftosa. Wow. So we'll say, so remember again, when we're talking about Hekdesh, what are we talking about? We're assuming for now that what we're talking about is as follows. There is an item that belongs to Hekdesh. I want to redeem it from Hekdesh, which means I want to transfer the value of it to the Beis HaMikdash and keep the object for myself. So the Mishnah told me that requires a beis din of 3 for that valuation. So the Gemara says our Mishnah doesn't reflect the view of Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. Because what does Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov say? Anything that you're redeeming from the Beis HaMikdash requires what? A beis din of 10, even for a needle. Right, even if you're using it, literally against sinur shalaktish, even a needle, a sewing needle of the Beis HaMikdash, if you're redeeming it, it requires a basin of 10. So it must be Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov holds like Shmuel. What does Shmuel say? Amar Shmuel, Asara Kohanim Ksuva B'Parsha. So we'll say, because remember again, according to Shmuel's logic is like this. Where do you get, and we're going to talk about this, so Shmuel holds that any time you're redeeming something from the Beis HaMikdash, it requires evaluation, and it requires evaluation with a basin of 10 people, 10 Kohanim, or 10 people. Well, called 10 people. Why? Because the word Kohen appears 10 times in the section of redemptions. But where did the Rabbanan come up with a basin of 3? Maybe you say, well, it says 3 times in the parasha. Karkos tichsibu arba tiski barba. If that's the case, then redemption of real estate, where it's mentioned 4 times, shall only require bezin of 4. Maybe you'll say, you're right. Maybe redemption of land from the Beis Hamikdash only requires a panel. We're calling it a bezdin, but it's not a bezdin in the classic sense, right? They're not adjudicating anything. They're evaluating something. So maybe land should only require 4. Lama Tanan, why does it say a karkaos tishav a coin? Yeah, we know that karka, we'll get this in just a little bit, but if you want to redeem land, real estate from the Beis Hamikdash, you require a panel of 10 people. And one of them must be a Kohen. Right? Ella Mai, the Mishami Buhu Asara. Hekdeshos, the Mishami Buhu Shisa, Liboy Shisa. But one second, Rabbi must say that because 3 works towards the final number of 10. So if that's the case again, then Hekdeshos, we could also say should be with 6, because 6 also works towards the final number of 10, to which the Gemara says, Kashi, right, that is a problem. So bottom line for our purposes is we're going to see that essentially when redeeming metaltalin, movable property from the Beis Hamikdash, the Mishnah's paskening over here. We'll see if it's halacha l'maisa that you need a panel of 3 people in order to evaluate that which you are redeeming. Next, ha'erchin. Now we'll say erchin. We're going to see in just a moment. Erchin. Classical definition of erchin is what? Erchin is a personal valuation. A person says, Erki alai, I hereby pledge my value to the Beis Hamikdash. Then the Torah provides I just want to point out, there's 2 different ways you could pledge your value to the Beis Hamikdash. There's an erech vow and a damim vow. Erech vow is the Torah gives objective valuations for a man between the ages of X and Y, a woman between the ages of X and Y. It doesn't matter who you are or what you are. All that matters is your gender and your age, and the Torah provides a fixed value. That's an erech vow. Dami alai, or right, of damim vow, is a person pledges their value. What's your value? So we would see essentially the way the Torah would come up with that is how much would you fetch if you were sold as a servant? Right? How much would you fetch on the open market if you were sold as a servant? So that would go ahead and determine your value. So that's then totally subjective to who you are and to what you are. So a damim vow versus an erech vow. So the Gemara says, my erchin, what does it mean when we say, my erchin hamataltalin? So we'll say, here's the problem. The Mishnah uses the word erchin, and it uses it as a valuation for movable property. The problem just is, there is no such thing as an erech vow that deals with movable property. Like we just said, erchin is a very specific vow where a person says, Erki alai, I hereby pledge my value to the Beis Hamikdash, and there are objective categories. Where does metaltalin come into this? Amar Rav Gidel, Amar Rav, Ba'omer erech kli ze alai. This is very interesting. So Rav Gidel says, what's the case? So Rav says, it's fascinating. The case is where I say, the erech, the value of this kli, let's say the shtender, right? The erech of the value of this shtender is upon me. Now I will say, now in reality, that phrase doesn't make any sense, because an erech vow is a personal valuation that is put into objective categories. A kli, a utensil, does not have an erech value. So what happens when a person says erech kli ze alai? So the Rav Gidel Amarav, so let's say top of Tesvav, haomer erech kli ze alai. If a person makes that statement, the erech, right, the value of this kli is upon me, no sein damav. He ultimately goes ahead and gives his value. He gives his value. Now we'll say now what is this? No sein damav, my timer. What's the reason for that? Adam yodea she'ein erech kli. A person knows that there's no erech for a utensil. The gamar va'amar mishum damim mishum hachi no sein damav. So we'll say this is very interesting. So if you take a look at the top Rashi says over here, homer erech ze kli ala no sein damav kimo shehu shava. Deodeu shein lomar lashon erech lekli ve'ein erko katsuv ve'gamar va'amar l'shein damim de'ein adam motzi dvar levatala. So we'll say Rav Gidel works with an interesting premise, which is people do not say nonsensical things, which is a tremendous premise to operate off of, right? That people, when a person says something, so they want their words to have meaning. So therefore, when a person says erech kli ze alai, the statement halachically doesn't make any sense because there's no erech vow by a kli. So what must the person be saying? They must be using erech as just a synonym for damim, for value. And therefore, really what they're doing is they're pledging the value of the utensil to the Beis HaMikdash. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Hachinami. So the Gemara says, Mishum Hachi, no sin gamav. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, Hai Erchin HaMetaltalin, then Lashon on the Mishnah shouldn't be Erchin HaMetaltalin, rather, Erchin Shel Metaltalin. It should be the value of Metaltalin, Mibayale. So the Gemara says, you're right, Tani Erchin Shel Metaltalin. According to this approach of Rav Gidol, the Mishnah has to read Erchin Shel Metaltalin, which would then mean what we're talking about over here is a person goes ahead and essentially pledges the value of a movable object to the Beis HaMikdash. We want that valuation to be done by a panel of 3. Okay, that's Rav Gidol, first approach. Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda Amravimi b'matfis metaltlin le'erchin. So I'll say, what's the case over here? This is very interesting. The case over here is where the case is where I'm saying erki alai. Erki alai. I hereby pledge my value to the Beis HaMikdash. So I'm making an erech vow. But what I say is like this: how am I going ahead and paying for that erech vow? How am I paying for it? With these kelim, with these utensils. So look at Rashi just a moment. B'matis metaltlin le'erech. K'shomer erki alai v'nischayv erech hakatzov l'vishanav v'hayu lo metaltlin v'amar harei le'erki v'chal alav kidusha u'balef dosan sarach gimel lo tzmiat hektish. So we'll say, what's the case? I'm making an erech vow. I'm making a regular erech vow. So I go ahead and I say erki alai, and then again, but I plan on paying for the erech vow with these utensils. And I articulate that. So let's say again, I say erki alai. Let's say my erech is 100 zuzim, right? 100 zuzim, 100 shekel. So okay, how am I paying? Yeah, I'm paying with my shtender. Paying with my shtender. So now I say, now what happens? Now I changed my mind. I don't want to pay with the shtender. I'll pay cash, but I want my shtender back. So again, the problem is my shtender is pledged to the Beis HaMikdash. So what do I need to do? I need to redeem it. How do you redeem it? Evaluate it. How do you evaluate it? Panel of 3. Panel of 3. But I'm making an erech vow, and I'm going out and I'm identifying utensils to pay for that erech vow. Okay, so the Gemara says if that's the case, then the Mishnah shouldn't say erchin metaltalin, it should say metaltalin shel erchin. Then the Mishnah should read metaltalin shel erchin. To which the Gemara says, you're right, tani metaltalin shel erchin. You're right. According to Rav Chisda, you'd have to change the wording of the Mishnah a little bit. Beautiful. Rabbi Yavo, another approach. Rabbi Yavo says, Amar ba'omer erki alai. Oh, this is very interesting. So Rabbi Yavo comes along and says, what's the case of the Mishnah? What's the case of the Mishnah? Case of the Mishnah is, I say erki alai. I'm making a regular, good old erech vow. That's what I'm doing. And now what happens? But Kohen ligbos me on the metaltalin. So listen to this. Now the Kohen. Now what happens? I'm past due on my bill to the Beis HaMikdash. I'm past due. So what happens? Apparently, when you're past due, and it's good to know, by the way, I'll say for third base mitzvah, what happens? Pay your bills on time, because if you don't pay your bills on time, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? So again, Ali Marowitz or Shmuel Karapkin or Ari Lerner, someone's coming over to your house, right? Someone, right? One of the Kohanim are coming over, and what's going to happen? They're going to collect. They're going to collect. So this is fascinating, by the way, because it appears that the Beis HaMikdash may have some. So I want to leave out any of our Kohanim. Did I leave out anyone? I said Alan Marowitz. I thought I said Alan Marowitz. Okay, good. His name is Alan, by the way. I just want to point out. His name is Alan, right? I said Ari. Gabi? Gabi comes like, only people are here. Only kind of are here. All right. Now I have to ask him Mechila for embarrassing him. All right, fine. All right, so nice again. Good. All other descendants are not going who are present, right? So it's a fascinating. So apparently there is some type of collection mechanism that does exist. So now I made an erech vow. So now what happens? So now I don't pay up. The Kohen comes to go ahead. He comes to my house to collect property. So listen to this. So the Gemara says, Metaltlin b'shlosha. So if the Kohen's coming to collect movable property, he needs a panel of 3 people to assess the value of what he's collecting to make sure that it's an accurate valuation. Karkaos ba'asara. And if he's coming to collect karka is going to require a panel of 10. So incredible, a panel of 10. So Amarle Ravacha Medifti Ravina. So we'll say that's the case of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says, when the Mishnah says that for erchin, you need 3. What it means is I made an erech vow. I haven't paid. The Kohen shows up to my house. He's coming to collect property. And now what happens? If he's going to use metaltalin, he has to go ahead and come with a panel of 3 to evaluate the metaltalin he's seizing. And if he's seizing karka, he needs a panel of 10. Okay, so one second, let me get this straight. I understand that in order to extract property from the Beis HaMikdash, you need a panel of 3. That makes sense. But why do I need a panel to bring property to bring property to the Beis Hamikdash? Now, as Rabbi say, it's interesting. It doesn't make sense. Generally, whenever we have a panel, or what we'll call a Beis Din, that's when property belongs to the Beis Hamikdash. I want to redeem it and take it for myself. So if you're going to take something from the Beis Hamikdash, l'maisi, you need to have a panel that evaluates it. This is talking about a case of the Kohen taking property from me to give to the Beis Hamikdash. Why does that need a panel? Why does that need a Beis Din? It's a svara. Mali yule, mali afuke. What does it matter if you're giving to the Beis Hamikdash or taking from the Beis Hamikdash? Afuke my taima. Dilma toy. Because again, why do I need a panel when I take property from the Beis Hamikdash and I redeem it, lest I make a mistake? So even when you're giving to the Beis Hamikdash, there could be a mistake as well. So I'll say this is quite interesting. So therefore, the Gemara suggests that in this case, and this is how the Rambam chooses to interpret this case in the Mishnah, that when the Mishnah is talking about the following case, I go ahead and I make an erech vow to the Beis Hamikdash. I make an erech vow. So now I don't pay. Kohen shows up at my house to take property. When the Kohen takes property, again, he needs a panel. He needs a Beis Din to evaluate the property he is seizing in satisfaction of my erech vow. And the chiddush over here is, not only do you need a panel when you want to redeem property from the Beis Hamikdash and take it back into your possession, but you also need a panel when evaluating property to be given to the Beis Hamikdash. Fascinating. Rabbi Huda says as follows. So both say, now remember again, Rabbi Huda was of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, one of the members of the panel has to be a Kohen. One of the three has to be a Kohen. So according to Rabbi Huda, makes sense, therefore, why it says Kohen in the section of valuations. But according to the Rabbanan, who say you just need a panel of three people, you don't need one of them to be a Kohen, then why does it say Kohen? Kasha. It's a good kasha. Okay. Hakakos tishav Kohen. So we'll say, so now remember, up until now, this is all been dealing with movable property. When it comes to real estate, real property, different halacha. Different halacha. What's halacha with real estate? So again, now we're assuming over here what's happening here is there's property that belongs to the Beis Hamikdash. I want to redeem it, which means I want to take the property back. I have to give the value of the land, a value to the Beis Hamikdash. So how do you evaluate it? That you need a Beis Din, which really means a panel of 10 people, and the Mishnah said one of them has to be a Kohen. So Amar says, Min Hanimili, where do you get that from? That one of them has to be a Kohen. So Amar Shmuel, Asara Kohanim Ksuvim B'Parsha, because the Torah writes the word Kohen 10 times in this section of redemption of property from the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Chad l'gufei. So one is to teach us Teker halacha. Therefore, have a miyut achar miyut. This is an exclusion after an exclusion, because then we'll say it didn't have to say Kohen. It could have just said ish. So one Kohen is teaching I need a Kohen. Then I have a miyut achar miyut, one limiting or exclusionary phrase after the other. Ve'ein miyut achar miyut alul rabos. And we'll say in general, there's an exegetical principle that whenever you have one miyut after another miyut, in this case, repeated a repetition of the word Kohen, it comes to include something else. What does it come to include? Dafilu tas Yisrael echad Kohen. To teach us that really what you need, so the 10 mentions of a Kohen teach me that I need a panel of 10. But the repeated exclusionary or limiting phrase of Kohen actually creates a ribui that teaches me that at the end of the day, I need a panel of 10, but all I need of that panel of 10 is one Kohen. The other 9 could actually be Yisraelim. Maskif luhu Rav Huna Breid Rav Nasan, Ema chamish kana v'chamish Yisraelim. Maybe it doesn't mean 9 Yisraelim, 1 Kohen. Maybe it means 5 Kohanim. In other words, all I know is that it doesn't mean 10 Kohanim. Maybe it means 5 Kohanim, 5 Yisraelim, Kasha. That is a question. So say, by the way, it's very, very dramatic to have all of these Gemaras, that have Kasha. Right? So we'll say you come to the end of a sugya and you get a Kasha. How do you feel? Right? Very unsure of yourself. What do I do with that? What do I do with that? Now again, there are mechanisms for us. We can go to the Rambam because the Rambam has to resolve everything, the Shulchan Aruch. But what do you do with it? I will say, it's such a profound yisod as we go through Chanukah, because Chanukah is one of these. It's a little bit of a strange Yom Tiv, because we're celebrating something that happened thousands of years ago, and so many other things have happened on the heels of that, right? So we had a military victory, but how many other wars were lost, right? And there was a tremendous miracle where one pach of sham and one little jug of oil lasts 8 days. How many other times did we need miracles, and the miracles didn't come for us when we needed them? It's a kasha. So what does a Yid do with a kasha? What do you do? You move forward. You move forward. Let's say the strength of our people is to ask the questions, be bothered by the questions, but to never be so overwhelmed by the kashas of life that you become paralyzed. What do? Kasha, 2 dots. 2 dots, I will say, always symbolizes what? It's like a pause, okay? Pause, reflect, and then what? Move forward. That is the nitzchias of a Yid. If you want to know what makes us the most spectacular nation on the face of the earth, it's this. It's the ability to have kashas, pause, and then move right forward. It's the avoda in our national lives, and it has to be the avoda in our personal lives as well. Life is filled with kashas, filled with difficult moments. Pause for a little bit, catch your breath, and then move right forward. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Adam, va'adam kiyotze bahen. And I will say, same thing as if a person is consecrated. So the Gemara says, Adam, mi kaddish. I don't think, could a person become consecrated? Is that possible? So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Avo, but Omer damei alai. No, we're talking about a person makes a damim vow. Person makes a dam. What is a damim vow? Again, a person pledges their value to the Beis Hamikdash. Again, so I mentioned before, there's an erech vow and a damim vow. 2 different types of vows. So a person says, Dami alai, disanyo, homer dami alai. Person says, my value is upon me. Shaman also, ke'eved hanimkar b'shuk. So again, I both say, how do you assess a person's value? How do you assess a person's value? So again, like we said, it's the amount of money that you could be sold as a servant, a laborer. A laborer, how much money would you fetch as a laborer on the open market? The eved is kishlekakos. And an eved is compared to real property, to real estate. Just like real estate requires 10, right? So to an Eved requires 10 for his valuation as well. Incredible. So by Rabbi Avin, Shar, Sear, Ha'omi Legazes Bekamas. Well, say this is fascinating. Let's say a person was makdish their hair. Now, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Seir ha'omer ligazes v'kdisho ubal liftoso b'shavyav sha'osa miseir adam nafa v'kilkule v'chabak. So we'll say there are different things you can make from human hair, right? So let's say a person has Baruch Hashem, long hair, and they pledge. So they're ready for a haircut, right? They're omer. It's ready to be cut. So we'll say. So let's say a person pledges that to the Beis Hamikdash. So now we'll say, what's the shaila? So remember, we'll say, what have we seen? And this is really fascinating. What have we seen? When valuating metaltalin, what's the halacha? You need a basin of how many? Or a panel of how many? 3. Karka requires 10. Now remember again, what we've seen is people in general are considered to be, an eved is considered to be hokash lakarka, considered the karka. So watch this. I pledge my hair, my long hair, my long flowing locks, right? I pledge my hair to the Beis Hamikdash. It's ready to be cut. So let's say, now what's the shaila? So the shaila is now, how do we treat this? Watch this. So Sarah Omi Ligazes Bekama. How many people do you need for the valuation here? On one hand, do we say Kigazas Dami, Ubishlosha? So we'll say we have a concept that since my hair is ready to be cut, perhaps it's considered to be like it's cut already. We have this concept, right? It comes from Maseches Menachos. Kalaroy lebila in bila makevespo. Something that is ready to be cut is considered to be as if it's already detached. So because it's detached, like it's ready to be detached, therefore maybe it's like it is detached already. Therefore, it's like metaltalin. If it's metaltalin, maybe it only requires a panel of 3. Oh, kimuchaber darmi ubasara. Or no, it's attached to me. So because it's attached to me, therefore it's like muchaber. Because it's muchaber, maybe it requires 10. Panel of 10, like karka. So Dashman, let's analyze. Hamakdish is avdo in molin bo. If a person is makdish, his eved is interesting. If you consecrate your eved, there's no me'ilah. There's no illegal use of that eved. In other words, let's say I'm makdish my eved, and then I use him to take out my garbage. Tell him to take out the garbage. So that's not me'ilah. Now why is that? Because remember again, eved is compared to karka, and there's no me'ilah by a karka. So the Rabbi Shmuel Silber says you can commit me'ilah with his hair. If you take his hair and use it for some mundane purpose, that's milah. V'kaimalon, the besara ha'omer ligazes pligi. So we'll say, and the Gemara establishes what kind of hair we're talking about, where his hair is long and ready to be cut. Shma mina nema hani tanai kani tanai. So we'll say, we see from here, it's machlokes tanaim. What is the status of hair that is ready to be cut? Is it considered to be like a metaltalin, or is it considered to be like mechuber? This nan. Rabbi Meir says, Yishtarm shein kekarka ve'ein kekarka. There are some things that are like karka, but yet they're not treated like karka. Ve'ein chachamim modelo. And the chachamim do not agree with him. Now, what's the example of this case? Eser gifanim tu'unos masarti lecha. For example, let's say again, Reuven says to Shimon, I gave you 10 laden vines, meaning vines with grapes that are ready to be harvested. And Shimon says, you only gave me 5. Shabbos said, this sounds like what? This sounds like what? Modeh b'miktsas, a partial admission. But remember, the only time you think Yeshua modeh b'miktsas is when? By metaltalin, not by karka. So here Reuven is claiming, Shimon, I gave you 10 laden vines. Shimon says, you only gave me 5. So Moshe says, now is this modeh b'miktsas? Watch this. Rabbi Meir mechayiv. Rabbi Meir says, yes, it's modeh b'miktsas. The chacham call mechuber l'karka. Chacham say, no. Anything attached to the ground is what? Is considered to be the ground. Now watch this. We're talking about grapes that are ready to be harvested. Rabbi Meir holds that grapes that are ready to be harvested are like what? Like they're already harvested, meaning when something is ready to be detached, we treat it as metaltalin. Right? And therefore Rabbi Meir says, this is a case of modeh b'miktsas, partial emission. And ultimately, again, the Chum say no, that as long as it's actually physically attached, it's considered to be attached like karka, and therefore no modeh b'miktsas. Now the Gemara wants to suggest that the same Rabbi Meir that would say that grapes that are ready to be harvested are like they are detached already, therefore like metaltalin, therefore modeh b'miktsas, would also hold that hair that is ready to be cut is also considered to be detached, therefore treated like metaltalin, and therefore needs a panel of 3 for valuation. To which the Gemara says, no. Lo. Afilu tim Rabbi Meir. Not necessarily. Even Rabbi Meir might agree that hair is like considered to be attached. Why? Most by grapes, Rabbi Meir holds that grapes that are ready to be harvested are like they're harvested already. Why? Because once grapes are ready to be detached, leaving them on the vine is actually detrimental to them. So therefore it makes sense that once a grape is ready to be harvested, we view it as detached, even if it's actually physically attached. Aval saro, when it comes to hair, but hair, as long as you leave it, it only gets better. It gets longer, thicker, fuller, whatever hair does. Right? So the Maisa again, it goes in and gets better. So even Rabbi Meir, so you can't necessarily align the shitos with each other. So we'll say, so that hair issue is still outstanding. But again, we keep on reinforcing the same idea, which is that halacha l'maisa, that again, a person, right? So again, the person case is just going back because the Divrei Masna was Adam. The Adam that we're talking about is where a person is pledging his value, making a damim vow to the Beis HaMikdash that requires a panel for valuation. Incredible. Let's go back to Dinei Nefashas. So we'll say, so remember again, the Mishnah said that Dinei Nefashas, right? Capital cases have to be tried by a Beis Din, have to be tried by a basin of 23. So the Gemara says as follows. So Dinei Nefashas, Kapasek Vatani. So we'll say, so now included in that, by the way, right, it said Dinei Nefashas Be'eser Mishlosha. So capital cases, 23. Haroveya V'hanirva Be'eser Mishlosha. So we'll say, so now again, talking about cases really of bestiality. Roveya Nirva means either, again, a person sodomized an animal or was sodomized by an animal. Those are dealt with also a basin of 23. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, Kapasek Vitani, Lo Shno Rovea Zachar, Lo Shno Rovea Nekiva. Now it doesn't make a difference if the animal had relations with a man or had relations with a woman. Either way, again, that type of case, a bestiality case, is going to be dealt with by a Beis Din of 23. So Bishlama Rovea Nekiva Dichse Varakta Asa Isha Vesa Behema. So I understand the case of the woman with the animal because that is an explicit pasuk in the Torah that if a woman Chas V'Shalom engages in an act of bestiality, right, that ultimately she and the animal are both judged, right, put to death by a basin of 23. Ela rovea zachar minolan. But where do we know ultimately again? Where do we know that halacha l'maisa by a man that this same halacha would apply? Because the pasuk says anyone who engages in an act of bestiality is put to death. And again, so we'll say, so the case that we're generally assuming over here is that where the man is sodomizing the animal. But even if the animal sodomizes the man, halacha l'maisa, there's also a death penalty. And the Torah is equating if the man was the perpetrator or the man was the one sodomized by the animal. Just as again, halacha l'maisa, if the man was the one who sodomized, ultimately again, he's put to death together with the animal by a beis din of 23. So too again, if he was sodomized by the animal, beis din, he's put to death together with a beis din of 23. All right, we're not going to go through the Rambam on that. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. All right, the Gemara says as follows. Good. Shar niska be'esem shlosha. Right, next. Shar niska, so I'll say, remember again, if you have a stoned ox, right? Ox that's stoned. When do you have a shar niska? Ox killed someone. Ox killed someone. So halach l'mayis, again, the ox itself is put to death. So the Gemara says, Shneimar, hashar yisakel, v'gam ba'alav yumas. So we'll say the pasuk says the ox will be stoned and also its owner will be put to death. Kimisas habaylim kach misas hashar. Same way that a person would be put to death. So if a person kills someone, so too again, the ox is put to death. And just as a person would be, if a person killed someone, they would be put to death with skila, so too if the ox kills someone, the ox is put to death with skila. Amar le Abai le Rava, mimai dahai v'gam ba'alav yumas lechimisas bailim kach misas ba'al. So we'll say now, here's what's interesting. So just to point out over here, the pasuk says, hashor yisakel, right? So remember again, we're talking about an ox that killed someone, a habitual offender, right? Back to Rabbi Kama days. So you have a shor muad. The ox killed someone, right? Gored 3 times, killed someone. So what's the halacha? The ox is put to death. So the lashon of the pasuk is, hashor yisakel v'gam ba'alav yumas. The ox is killed, and its owner will also be put to death. Now, I will say the pasuk is not understood literally. Why? Because if my ox chas v'shalom kills someone, I am not put to death for that. Right? So what does it mean when the pasuk says the owner is put to death? The Gemara darshans the same death penalty that you would give to a person if they killed another person is the very death penalty you give to the ox if it kills someone. What's the death penalty if Reuven kills Shimon? What's the death penalty? Skila. So too if Reuven's ox kills someone, the ox gets skila, not the owner. Now the Gemara says, how do you know? Amar by the Rava, mimai dahai v'gam ba'alav yumas lechimisas bailim kach misas hashor dasa. How do you know that the pasuk comes to teach me that the ox gets the same penalty, death penalty, as a person who kills someone? Amar beis ema liktalahu da'asa. Maybe the pasuk is actually coming to teach you the following halacha. Maybe the owner of the ox is also put to death. In other words, maybe if Reuven's ox kills someone, not only is the ox executed, but Reuven is executed as well. Maybe it's both. So the Gemara says, "Imki lichtov kra v'gam ba'alav." Then the pasuk could have just said, "and also the owner." Right? The pasuk could have just said, "Also the owner." Say, let the shar be executed, and also the owner. Why? And just leave it like that. Why write it in the prolonged form of gam ba'alav yumas? And remember, any time the Torah uses extra words, it's for drasha purposes. I'll tell you why. Because if it would have just said gam ba'alav, hava amina biskila, I would have thought that maybe the owner gets skila as well. Beskila sagalaitcha? Really? You think he's going to get skila? So the Gemara says, sagalaitcha, beskila sagalaitcha, katal ihu besayif. Mamona beskila. That says interesting. The Gemara says, actually, if one person kills another person, the punishment, the death penalty is sayif. That was one of the things we're going to do in Sanhedrin, is actually going to go through all the different death penalties. Because interestingly enough, kind of, when we think about death penalty, we think about kind of all the same. Either way, you're dying, right? Either way, the person is being put to death. We're going to see that in halacha, there were certain death penalties that were more painful and certain that were less painful. And depending on the infraction, depending on the sin, really determined which death penalty one received. So the Gemara apparently says over here that if a person kills someone else, he gets saif, he gets sword. Gets decapitation, sword. So the Gemara says, Mamona b'skila, but yet if his ox kills someone, he'll get skila. Skila is considered to be a more severe form of death. We'll discuss how skila was done as they would push someone off a very high rooftop, and if he wouldn't die from impact, then they would stone him. So it's considered to be one of the more severe forms of death penalty, as opposed to, let's say, decapitation, which is instantaneous. So the Gemara says, "V'dilma hay dekasav rachmana yumas la kuli iluya." La fuki misayef l'chenek. Well, maybe the pasuk is coming to teach you that no, we're going to put the owner to death also, but maybe we'll be makel on him. That we'll go ahead and we won't subject him to sayif, but rather we'll subject him to chenek. Chenek is strangulation. So the Gemara says, "Hani chol damar chenek chamar." That makes sense according to the opinion that says that chenek, strangulation, is a more severe form of death penalty than a sword. Alaman damar chenek kil ma'ikal meimar. But according to the opinion that says that strangulation is more kal, is more lenient, what is there to say? To which the Gemara said, "Lo sakadayt chodichsev im kofer yushas alav." The pasuk says, interestingly enough, if a monetary payment shall be imposed upon him. Visa daitra barktaluhu. Now, if you think that the owner of the ox that killed someone should himself be subject to a death penalty, v'haksiv lo sikhu kofer lenefesh rotzeach. So here's what's interesting. The Torah tells us that when Reuven's ox kills Shimon, so the ox is put to death, and Reuven has to pay a financial penalty. But one second, if Reuven himself was subject to a death penalty, the Torah tells explicitly that when someone is subject to capital liability, they cannot buy their way out of that punishment, right? You can't offer money instead of your life. To which the Gemara says, the pasuk says, "V'aksiv lo sichu kofer lenefesh rotzeach." Adrabah, mishum higufa katal ihu lo tiski mamona. You're right. Gemara says maybe the halacha is like this. Maybe when Reuven himself kills someone, you're right. He can't give monetary compensation instead of a death penalty. However, katal show. But maybe when Reuven's shar kills someone, in that case, the shar is going to be put to death. Reuven also deserves a death penalty, but because Reuven's not the perpetrator himself, maybe he can offer monetary compensation instead. The pasuk says, when Reuven kills Shimon through a striking him, right? So when Reuven strikes Shimon and kills him, Reuven is a murderer, he's put to death. So we'll say the halacha is that a person is only put to death when they themselves have taken the life of someone else. They are not put to death when their property has taken life. So we'll say, and this is important, this is halacha l'maisa. So if Reuven has a shar, even if Reuven's shar is a muad, and Reuven's shar goes ahead and kills Shimon, so there's two things that happen. Reuven, right, the shar is put to death through skila. Reuven is not executed, but Reuven is liable to financial compensation, or is liable to make financial compensation. But Reuven, the owner of the ox, even though Reuven was irresponsible and he was derelict, halacha l'maisa, he is not liable to a death penalty. So we'll say this is fascinating. The kasha shar b'sinai bekama. So this is fascinating. Look at Rashi. Shar b'sinai behema shekarva lahar ba'ot shashchina sham tichsev im behema im ish lo yichya. So we'll say, now watch this. The halacha by Har Sinai was the following halacha. So by Har Sinai, no one was allowed to approach the mountain. That was the halacha, right? Not only that, approaching the mountain was liable to death. So now what happens if by Har Sinai a person had an animal that approached Har Sinai, right? So now, the shaila, so now such an animal has to be put to death. How many people do you need on the panel to judge that ox? So in other words, we said before that generally Shar HaNiskal requires a basin of 23. So what would you need by a basin by Har Sinai? Bekama, so mi gamar sha'a midoros, olo. Ultimately, again, do we learn out what happened by Har Sinai? In other words, would we learn out the halacha for Har Sinai by what would be done in subsequent generations or not? And I both say, generally, again, by Shar Niskal, right? What did the Mishnah say? By Shar Niskal, ultimately, again, we needed 23. What was it? Right? Shar Niskal b'asmum shlosha. So do we say like this? Maybe we can learn out the halacha. It's fascinating. Generally, when we learn halacha, we look for precedent. Now, what the Gemara is saying is, could we learn out what to do by Har Sinai by what the Torah would say to do for future generations? And what the Torah would say for future generations is that Shar HaNiskal is judged by 23. So maybe even a Shar by Har Sinai should be judged by 23 as well. Mi gamar sha'a midoros. So do we learn out what happened historically from what happens prospectively in the future? In the future, so the Gemara says, "Oh lo." So Tashma, let's analyze. The Tanya Rabbi Cheskel im behema im ish lo yichya ma ish b'chav gimel af behem b'chav gimel. So we'll say. So the Gemara answers, "You're right. We compare a behema to an ish. Just like even by Har Sinai, a person would have been adjudicated by a Beis Din of 23, so too again a shar would have also been adjudicated by a Beis Din of 23. Rabbi say this is such a profound Gemara. Like, what is this? What is this? What will be the halacha of a shar by Har Sinai? So Rabbi say I think there's something really incredibly profound over here, which is I don't know. I never remember seeing Gemara like this. Generally, whenever we see a halacha, we always look at halacha retrospectively. What was done and how was it done? Right? How did it occur? And can we learn out based on what? Can we learn out what to do now? Based on what occurred in the past. That's really the fundamental shaila. Here, what the Gemara is saying is, if something happened by Har Sinai, could we look forward and be able to see kind of what the Torah outlines for future generations and use that as a baseline for Har Sinai? What is the Gemara doing? What is the Gemara doing? Rabbi Soloveitchik said, the Ribbon Sha'olam exists in Haya Hove V'yeya, past, present, and future. The Rav called this the unitive time consciousness. Unitive time consciousness. And I'll say, and the incredible part is, we are made b'tselem Elokim, which means that there's a piece of us that is also able to live Haya Hove V'yeya, past, present, and future. Time is not a linear continuum. For the Ribbon Shalom, it's not, and even in certain respects for us, it's not as well. We know this. There's the concept of tshuva, and if a person does tshuva of a high enough degree, what can you do? You could fundamentally change your past, right? And a person acts now in a particular, what could happen? They fundamentally set a different course for their future. I think the Gemara highlights something like this to remind us that there is the possibility of impacting the future and impacting the past. Although we're right here in the present, what we do has such a dramatic ripple effect on what comes after us, but also could have a tremendous retrospective ripple effect as well on our past as well. Things we do today could change the past. Really, that's what Shuvah does. And things we do today could fundamentally lay out a different vision for our future. So we'll stop over here for today. And Meretz Hashem, we'll pick up, Oh boy. All right. Okay, good. All right. Well, we'll be all right. It moves quickly. And I'll say, Shkoyach, Halichtika, Chanukah, Good Chodesh, and Baruch Hashem, a tremendous chesed with all of you. The 8:30 minyan in Meretz Hashem is going to take place in the Beis Medrash, and the 9 o'clock minyan will Meretz Hashem be here in the shul. Shkoyach, everyone. At 9:45? No, Rabbi Richter.